today's live chat, and I picked this subject at random, but I think maybe it was some kind of something in my subconscious which made me actually do it, because it is somewhat relevant to events which are happening at the moment. So the two things, therefore, maybe okay, subconscious, whatever. Anyway, I'll talk about the Wannsee Conference, but then I'll possibly talk about the importance of things like economic planning afterwards. The Wannsee Conference is often thought to be the place where the Holocaust was decided upon, but that's completely false. This was a planning meeting. It was a planning meeting lower down from where the decision makers were. It was a meeting whereby it was to be decided how or to interpret how something was to be done. If you ever go to Wannsee, Wannsee is located it's a western suburb of Berlin. In former days, when communist days, you went to Wannsee on the S-Bahn. So the S-Bahn's the same, but I once hitchhiked from Berlin to London, and so you got the S-Bahn to Wannsee, and then you walked to where the border point was. Just before the border point was, people used to hang around there trying to get a lift, and so I did that. And my most recent visit was there in the summer, and Wannsee is a really attractive place to visit. You've got this big lake. Apparently it's got the largest inland beach in Europe, or at least that's what the tourist authorities used to say in former times. I find that a bit hard to believe, but anyway, that's what they said. You've got these really big houses, and it really is. It's a really nice place to actually go to. And the first location for the conference was actually another house. And because they moved the location, because the first meeting had to be put off because of because the United States came into the war, and then at that same time is when Hitler told the Gauleiters that the Holocaust was about to happen. So those two things happened at the same time, but so they moved the conference from one place to another. And I have a video of the the house where the first one was actually going to be held. I mean, obviously I just stood in the street and filmed it because there's people in there. I got the impression that some of the people in there were officers, and maybe the homes as well. It could have been mixed use. It was a rather large building. But the reason it was moved was because of the building of the Wannsee Conference. It's 56 to 58 Am Grossen Wannsee, the street. That was because there was catering possibilities. And as bad as this may sound, that is the reason. Indeed, the place where the kitchen was, you can actually see it from... you can actually walk in from the inside, obviously, but from the outside, it's on the corner building, and that was where the food was prepared. So that is the reason why it actually took place in that building. This meeting has been described as the most murderous meeting in history, and maybe I would say one of the most murderous, although I'm a bit pushed to think of anything which was more murderous. And what it brought together was 15 people who had individual things to actually do with it. So you had people there at who were the frontline killers, the people actually doing it, and you had people there who were civil servants who had probably never seen a dead person in their lives. So it was this mixture. There was a couple who actually turned up who didn't know what was going on, and so it's this that people are being given this invitation. Some of them mightn't understand it, others understand perfectly well what it's all about. They go there, and then they find out. Now, some of these characters were old fighter Nazis, so they were deep within the conspiracy theories and of hate and having to kill Jews, and others were just civil servants who might have joined the party just to get the perks that were offered. So you got this massive amount of people. I know I often say on videos I do that this is the Nazi party number. I say it deliberately because it gives the indication of when they joined. You get lots of people joining on the 1st of May 1933. There's a very good reason for that, and that is because they saw which way the wind was blowing. There's others who didn't join until later, and again, it's nearly always in order to get the perks. Now, some people had the paperwork was actually sent to them as a matter of course to actually join. I've just done a video. Well, sorry, it hasn't published. So I say I've sort of done a bit of it on one of the German resistors who his paperwork turned up to join the National Socialist Lawyers Association in 1937 as party membership, and he sent the forms back, which I think that required a lot of courage. I certainly wouldn't have done that. I might have filled them in, but I wouldn't have sent them back to make the point. Now, today I decided I was going to talk about Erich Neumann, and the reason in my subconscious, so when you can write down what you think it was, why it was in my subconscious, why it was relevant, is because he was the boss of the 4-year plan. Now, Neumann was born in 1892, 31st of May 1892, and he comes from a place called Forst, which is today on the border between Germany and Poland, but then it was nowhere near the border. It was very far away from the border. So in this way, you can see how the way that in the First World War, there was the creation of Poland, which took a little bit of land, but as a result of the Second World War, the fact that the Soviet Union took more than half of Poland, then Poland had to be compensated for this, and this was a land that came from Germany. Now, Neumann came from a very well-off family. His father owned a factory, and he could afford to send his son to good education. Now, many of the people I actually talk about are highly educated people. In some cases, another video I finished recently was the Dachau commandant, an utter sadist, but somebody who had a degree in agriculture. So this is something. The fact that they've got these degrees doesn't mean to say that they're not sadists as well. I mean, we have the case with the Einsatz, which is often said that you've got these people, nearly all of them had degrees. In fact, there's even a Rash who had 2 degrees. One of them even had a degree in theology, and nearly all of them, the commonest degree was law. So anyway, so in the case of Neumann, he studied law and economics in Freiburg, and so but unfortunately he was born in 1892, means he had to go through the war, and so he did. During the war, as an educated person, he was commissioned as a first lieutenant, and after the war he started work at the Prussian Ministry of the Interior in Essen. So he's gone from one side of so he's from the middle of the country to the west, while Freiburg, of course, is in the southwest. So in December 1924, he got a job in the Prussian Ministry of Trade, and from 26, he was works as district administrator in Lower Silesia, near where Zielona Góra is today. And from there he worked in Prussian Ministry of Trade and Industry as an economist. So that means to say he would represent Germany at international conferences. Now, it's always worth repeating, I think, that Germany was a federal country. So when I say Prussia, Prussia is 2/3 of the country, approximately, and but there were different rules and different laws in different countries. So for example, the second largest country within Germany, if you like, or state within Germany, was Bavaria. So there may be different laws in different places for this reason. So Neumann, he became ministerial director in the Prussian State Ministry, responsible for administrative reform in September 32. And in September 33, he was on the Prussian State Council. Now, the Prussian State Council, July 1933, was there to replace a previously electoral job, and he would only, a previously elected body, and he'd only have got this job if he were considered politically reliable. In any case, the Nazi Prussian State Council didn't have any power as the previous state council had had. It was only their advisory. It needs also to be pointed out that the government in Prussia failed to produce the elections in Prussia in 1932 failed to produce a government. So this meant that the central government had a sort of, the word in German uses as a coup. It got control of the Prussian government, was ruled by the federal government, and it was an emergency government under Franz von Papen, because the Nazis and the communists wouldn't come to an agreement, and none of the democratic parties wanted to have anything to do with these two. So that was the reason. So there was three parties, and there was no one with a majority within it. Now, Neumann himself had been a member of the DNVP, which is the party of Alfred Hugenberg, who was the Rupert Murdoch of the time. He owned a huge amount of newspapers. He is one of the people who steered Hitler into power. So Hitler's being appointed chancellor, he was one of them, like Franz von Papen, who thought that they could control Hitler and get Hitler to do what they wanted. Neumann, however, saw which way the wind was blowing. In May of 1933, he joined the Nazi Party, and in his case, it probably was a career move. I suspect, or I can't prove this, but I suspect that he possibly would have looked down on these Nazis, as many of the former establishment elite did look down on them. Although, having said that, I need to be clear that Himmler went out of his way to try and recruit aristocrats, the SS, and there was a time when even the upper aristocrats, about 20% of the upper ranks of the SS were actually held by aristocrats. The thing with Neumann is that his career certainly did progress, and particularly after he joined the SS. He joined the SS in 1934, and he was assigned to the staff of the SS main office, and he even got the rank of Obersturmbannführer, which is what it's like. It was like Eichmann had. It was a very high rank, lieutenant colonel. But he didn't get this because he went through the ranks. And let's face it, in 1936, he was, 44 years old. So that again, that would only happen if he had a great deal of clout within the administration. He stayed at the Prussian Ministry of State, and he was assigned to the 4-year plan. Now, the 4-year plan itself is worth an entire book, which I'm not going to do now, but I shall skim over it very, very quickly. The 4-year plan was a plan which effectively lasted from 1936 to 1945. That's more than 4 years, but it seems that many of these Nazis couldn't actually count. The objective of this was to prepare Nazi Germany for war. That was it. It's got nothing to do with economic success or anything like this. It is to use all of the instruments of the economy to help produce weapons and whatever other materials were necessary for war. Now, previously, Hjalmar Schacht, who, again, another person who helped steer Hitler into power, a banker, he had a plan. Indeed, his plan also, called the New Plan, did have elements of this, so the increase in military spending and things like this, but he saw a tighter fiscal policy. Now, the 4-year plan was something which also called for a word which now begin to hear often in English, which is autarky, which comes directly from the German. And there could be a direct link, I think, between using a German word in the English language for this type of policy. Autarky means self-sufficiency. Now, self-sufficiency in many ways it makes sense in times of difficulty that you've got everything on hand. But okay, in our in our lifetime now, 90 years later, it's far more difficult. It's far more difficult to achieve. Not only that, because you can't grow bananas around here or coffee around here, so you're going to have to import it. Not only that, in our society, we've got these very complicated supply chains, and this makes this sort of thing really, really difficult. Then it was a bit more likely, but at the same time, there's all sorts of raw materials, and the best example I can think of is steel, which can't be produced. Now, in the First World War, Germany had a major problem, is it didn't have, it could produce fertilizers, but instead the things that were put in fertilizers were being used for weaponry, and therefore this created the almost famine, maybe even exaggerate, but the hunger. I mean, there's lots of people died of starvation in Germany during the First World War, and this is a direct result of the war itself. Two things: lack of fertilizer and lack of people producing things on the land. So the idea of self-sufficiency, I think, you can produce everything yourself, but this also means a drop in the standard of living. Now, as far as Germany is concerned, you're looking at the standard of living that people had in 1928 wasn't surpassed in West Germany until the 1950s and East Germany until the 1960s. Nazism didn't just. There may have been in some sectors a slight improvement of the situation of the worst days of the Depression, but if you compared the standard of living in Germany to all of its neighbors, including Poland, I would say that even in those countries, the standard of living was possibly, certainly in the Western countries, it was higher. And in Poland, for example, I think it was probably even equal to that in Germany. The standard of living was not good. It's often talked about an economic miracle under the Nazis because people finding work. Well, they're finding work everywhere. But most of these people who found work, it had something, although probably in most cases it was indirectly related to armaments production. There is a theory, in fact, I sort of subscribe to this, but this is something because I read, when I was 10 or 11 years old, I read William Shirer's book, The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, and in this he sort of, he goes on about the costs to the economy. So maybe from, I've got from there, Gertz Ali, his 2005 book, he also has the opinion that the Nazi economy was based on getting the armaments in order to steal from other countries. And just to give one very good example, the bank reserves, the gold reserves of Austria, a country with 1/6 the population of Nazi Germany, when it was occupied, the very day of occupation, the very first day of occupation, the gold reserves of Austria, which were 3 times that of Germany's, were stolen. And this happened in other countries as well. Okay, in Poland, they managed to get them out of the country. But what we see, you've got this idea of Nazi gold, something like $700 million worth then of gold being stolen from central banks by the Nazis. So the economy was geared to war with a view of stealing things later. There may be people who disagree with that opinion. Now, that's a 4-year plan. Sorry, I could have done that in more depth, but I think it'll be coming off the thing. Now, point. As far as Neumann was concerned, so his responsibilities were sort of general business aims, but he also was involved in the preparation of relevant decrees and laws and regulations. So this is a highly regulated state. In 1938, Neumann became state secretary and deputy for Paul Körner. Now, Körner was the right-hand person of Hermann Goering. And Goering was somebody who liked to collect jobs, but he didn't like doing the work. For example, Albert Speer, more or less sort of turned up to his place, was kept waiting around for about an hour. Then he said to him words to the effect of, "Why don't you let me do your job and you just pretend you're doing it?" And I think that would have fitted in with Goering's ideologies. Goering was head of economics and he knew nothing about economics. He was a pilot. There was nothing wrong with somebody getting a job which they theoretically mightn't be able to do, but in Hitler's case it usually didn't work out well. Well, it worked out well in the case of Albert Speer, but usually for others it didn't. Now, one of Neumann's tasks here was to be involved in the confiscation of assets belonging to Jews. In 1939, he got a rank which was SS Oberführer. Now, an Oberführer was an honorary rank, and if it was anything doing it higher than a colonel, anyway. So Neumann was one of those who was informed of the planned invasion of the Soviet Union. So he had to work out what was going to happen in agricultural production. And in a lecture on the 19th of April, 1941, the Administrative Academy in Berlin, he said that due to a lack of imports of animal feed, the conquered areas would no longer be able to produce surpluses due to the lack of working horses and would therefore need to have support. And now on the 2nd of May, 1941, he brought this topic up with Paul Körner and Herbert Bacher. And Herbert Bacher is the person who came up with what has been called the Hunger Plan. He was the person responsible for the allocation of food to the troops, but also to deny it to the civilian population. His Hunger Plan assumed that 30 million people would die of starvation. And I mean, the humanitarian considerations apart, it's absolutely absurd that they could think that they can get an economy to work by starving people. Anyway, that part. One thing I don't think that they understood is that each part of the economy is interdependent on each other. So if it's clear that harvest would be lower because there isn't enough horses to do the work, therefore they must have understood that if people who look after horses aren't available anymore to be shoeing them, and the blacksmiths, etc., what's going to happen? It's then the horses that they are around aren't they going to do the work. The thing is that these people who work in blacksmiths were often Jewish. So by the Holocaust itself is having a severe effect, or had a severe effect on the economy. In the Lublin area in 1942, because the Jews had been taken away and murdered, the Nazis actually ran vocational courses for Polish farmers, training them to do the jobs that were once done by the Jews. So Neumann also had another job. He was appointed the deputy chair of the supervisory board of Continental Oil, and a part of that job would have involved the exploitation of the oil deposits in the occupied territories, and above all in the Soviet Union. Now, as far as the Wannsee Conference of the 20th of January 1942 is concerned, he represented the 4-year plan. And so he was a civil servant. He had to represent his ministry. And as far as he was concerned, as an economist, he understood that the Jews who were working in factories essential for war effort, they had to be kept there. If not, the work that they're doing is going to end up being not done. And so he said that they cannot be deported unless replacements could be found elsewhere. He could argue that he knew that no replacements could be held elsewhere, so therefore he was trying to save them. But he wasn't using humanitarian arguments. But then again, humanitarian arguments wouldn't have worked there. Now, the Reich Security Main Office, RSHA, and the Military Economic Office, Armaments Office, had come to an agreement on this subject. And later, so Adolf Eichmann had some deportation guidelines issued on the 31st of January 1942, only 11 days later. And he did, at that moment, provide for an exception for German Jews working in the armaments factories or in agriculture. There wasn't many people working in agriculture, but in the armaments factories there were. Now, later you have something like the Rosenstrasse protest, which was more than a year later, where they did try to round up people who worked in these factories, despite the disruption that would cause. But some of the family members then went and protested anyway. I've done a video on that. In August 1942, Neumann became general director of something called the German Potash Syndicate. Now, that potash is somewhat important, I think, for various elements of the economy, but above all in agriculture as well, where it was used. Now, as far as Holocaust was concerned, he said he didn't know anything about it when he was arrested in 1945. He was interrogated. I put a picture of him under arrest with his sign in front of him saying his number. But at the time, not much was actually known, and as about Wannsee Conference, and he was released in 1948, which because he said he was ill, and he mightn't have been feigning. He was only 56 years old, but he died on the 23rd of March 1951 in Garmisch-Partenkirchen, and the don't know what to say. I mean, he was one of these faceless civil servants who had to do, didn't have to do, well, I suppose he had to turn up. He had the invitation, and something, I suppose anybody would have failed to turn up for Hydra. But he's one of these faceless civil servants who didn't say no or didn't ask the question why, who made all these other things possible. And anyway, good. So I'll come on to the questions. Oh dear, sorry, I'm still on. Yes. So okay, right. So Big says he saw the movie. I don't know which one you're referring to, because there's the 1984 one, Die Wannsee Conference, which was the second thing, the second thing I actually ever recorded on VHS. And I think it was the second thing. The first thing was Man of Steel from Andrzej Wajda. That was in Polish. And then there was Conspiracy, which I've never seen. I've only seen clips on YouTube Shorts. BBC HBO production, 2001, Kenneth Branagh, which Kenneth Branagh must be brilliant. And there's a 2022 one in German called Die Wannsee Conference. And I haven't seen that one either, so I'm not doing very well. I did actually write that I saw the film Conspiracy, but I saw this. I found something I'd written in about 2013, but I thought I must have confused this with the Uprising, which I'd seen. Steve asks if I'm German. No, I'm not. I'm British. So anyway, okay, so thanks to Acton, hello, and Craig and Big, and everybody else who's been here. There was a question actually from yesterday, because I did bring up this thing about tariffs, which was some planned economy. The thing with this 4-year plan, and obviously I was thinking about all this about tariffs, that must have been in my mind, and self-sufficiency, is that I can understand it a bit more in the 1930s, but I just can't understand. I think it makes less sense now, because we have now in economies in wealthier countries which have highly value-added products, and in poorer economies there are less value-added products. So if you get a T-shirt or something, then it's probably made in Bangladesh, and so it's got very little added value to it. But if you start looking at the machinery that makes your mobile phones or something like that, or I don't know, the satellites or something. That's probably made in the United States or Germany or something. So or cars. So that is I think that's a difference. But in though it was less so then. I think in the 1930s. I'm not saying it was because you had imperial systems where in the countries where cotton was produced, for example, India is a good example where they produced lots of clothing even then. Anyway, that's just a minor point there. Okay, thanks very much for watching. I hope you found it interesting. I haven't decided what tomorrow's video will be about now. Yet I'll think of something before then. I'll give you an idea what it might be. Hello from Scotland, Roddy, and I might do something on the Holocaust again. Seems to be more people interested in that, so something I can talk about easier. So thanks very much for watching. So all the best from me in the United Kingdom, and bye for now.